Hey neighbor, it's time for another episode of I Got It Wrong, a show where I look back at my old reviews and admit fault, bias, or maybe just a major change of opinion, because opinions can change over time, and I like to be upfront if mine do. Today we're looking at the quickest turnaround ever for an I Got It Wrong, since this album released just over a year ago in February 2021, For Those That Wish to Exist by the British metalcore band Architects. I've never had an experience with an album quite like this. Their label sent me For Those That Wish to Exist an entire month before it officially dropped, so I had a ton of time to space out listens, gather my thoughts, decide how I feel, but the weird thing was that every listen I gave it felt like my mind was flip-flopping until I finally felt confident enough to say this. And even though I do see it as a slight step down from Holy Hell, that's an album that I would now give a perfect 5-star review to. So if that's a 5, For Those That Wish to Exist is a 4.5. At the time, that's genuinely how I felt. I acknowledged some of the generic tendencies the record displayed, but swallowed the pill anyways, because a huge part of my brain said, as long as it hits, they got the heavy and some cleaner stuff too. Who cares? It's Architects, so I ran with that. World calamity was the connecting theme, a planet marred by political chaos in which we, the humans, are destroying our own future by refusing to change course or admit to ourselves that maybe in 100 years, maybe even less, things are gonna get incredibly scary if nothing is done. Noble quests to drive home this narrative are exactly that, noble. But I was shocked at the minuscule amount of desire I've had to return. In fact, before I started planning this re-review, I hadn't played the entire album since last summer, and even that felt kind of forced, like, hey, I thought I loved this album, so why do I keep skipping the songs when they come up on shuffle? Architects built a ship that looks pristine from a distance. Underneath the hull, trouble's brewing. An iceberg the size of Sam Carter's biggest blag ever, waiting to remind us that even in moments of turbulence, mistakes can be made even with the best of intentions. Radio-friendly might be a good way to summarize the issues. Like, of course, there's plenty of cluttered junk drawer theories we could dive into as far as why this album sounds too clean but not necessarily overproduced, etc., etc., but leaning more mainstream-friendly with predictable choruses that sometimes fail to catapult the song past a stalemate should nudge you in the direction of how I'm feeling. I wouldn't pass this off as the album where all our metalcore has abandoned us, but they definitely breached the gates of poppier waters time and time again, even on the lead single Animals. That's not a cardinal sin, as some of you would probably love to believe, but it definitely can mean danger ahead, even if it works in the song's favor, at least in certain cases. For Those That Wish to Exist traps the listener in a purgatory of expectations. The first half, give or take maybe a track or two, is extremely strong. Black Lungs, An Ordinary Extinction, Dead Butterflies, are you kidding me? It's all killer, no filler. But that's where the double-edged sword kicks in. We're expecting the quality to continue along those lines, yet when you don't find yourself coming back to the album much at all, you start to listen more closely to that back half, and that's where I saw the criticism that I couldn't initially put a finger on. Lazy hooks, generic millennial whooping, elements that feel borrowed from a variety of other bands in the radio rock scene, these are all overly abundant problems, from around Flight Without Feathers onward. Architects are holding the warning sign at the airport to greet the arrival of disaster for an entire hour, their longest album by about 15 minutes. It makes everything feel less consequential when you're dragging it the fuck out and relying too heavily on those environmental aspirations, which proves to be exhausting because they're not adding much of anything to the conversation. Treating this like a concept album would make sense, but it's technically not one, more so a collection of unified thoughts about our planet and why humanity can't seem to give a shit for long enough to actually turn things around. Moody atmospheres parasail us into the crust of the earth on the album opener Do You Dream of Armageddon, before abruptly and kick-acidly flipping the script to Black Lungs, one of the deadliest cuts Architects have ever offered. It's bolstered by a twisting riff that immediately beckons headbangs and shouting, disguising its cry for help in a sea of musical carnage that's up there among their best songs ever. By adding a string section to various points of For Those That Wish to Exist, we get a heightened sense of suspense that does eventually play itself out by becoming a bit of a trope, But before that happens, a tip of the hat to the incredible Dead Butterflies that guts itself from the inside out. Instant jolts of electricity are felt upon impact, giving us a really wicked good reminder that Architects are masters of a soaring rock hook when they want to be, plus that symphonic rock breakdown gives life just by being there, and the drumming in the verses really hits the perfect sweet spot. Speaking of drums, Giving Blood hammers home some of the best Dan Searle has to offer. The transformative nature of his playing style is on full display, and the transition from verse to chorus absolutely fucking rips. Alright, so as much as I admire Flight Without Feathers for daring to be different, I don't think there's enough gas in the tank to warrant a nearly 4-minute song. That type of problem starts manifesting itself there, and while Impermanence before it is cool enough, it is pretty vague with some questionable lyrics and a rather lackluster breakdown, but it's that section, even if it does have its positives, that sets up a sharp quality drop that's coming soon. Part of me was overjoyed to see the likes of Mike Carr from Royal Blood and Simon Neil from Biffy Clyro joining the ranks of Architects, but in hindsight, I do have some unfortunate nitpicks with both. Little Wonder fails to differentiate itself and sounds like Architects on cruise control with no real reason for Mike Carr to necessarily be there other than for the sake of having another name on the record. And while Goliath towers over Little Wonder like Goliath would to David in the Bible, it does show signs of fatigue. Simon Neil screaming his fucking heart out over a drill sergeant drum and thunderous guitar works big time, and the chorus is generally really good and solid. I love the heaviness of the track and the string section fade out at the end, but the verses just aren't that compelling, and it reminds me of the problems facing the final three. Dan Searle replacing his late brother Tom as the main songwriter in the band is definitely showing how threadbare things can be without him. I don't think Dan ever expected to be thrust into this role, especially not permanently, so I do have sympathy for that. But Demigod and Meteor and Libertine are weak lyrically and suffer from some structural damage too. With Libertine crying out with lines like "the rust worshipping the rain," these final moments are littered with tropes of generic metalcore, and I'm honestly surprised at how big Meteor has been for the band considering how safe it feels past that explosive guitar riff. Not an entirely bad song, mind you, more so just a bit forgettable. I think this really sets up the entire problem with this album. It's the Architects didn't necessarily know where to go after something so intensely personal like Holy Hell. For Those That Wish to Exist is a 4.5. This isn't a bad album, but is it deserving of that high of praise? I don't think so. It feels like something's missing. Maybe it's the shelf life overall, the replay factor, the heart is definitely absent at times, like they're on autopilot while slowly drifting towards a place that makes them feel a little bit more like somebody else impersonating Architects. My opinion drifted somewhere else too, and looking at their 9th album as it stands today, I'm giving For Those That Wish to Exist a light 3.5 out of 5. Thank you for watching another episode of I Got It Wrong. This is just another snapshot of my changing opinion, and if you want to catch up on more episodes that I've done in the past, then tap this playlist right here, or tap here for my original review of this album. All of my socials can be found in the description. Thank you guys so much for your support, for hitting that like button, and I'll see you soon for more on ARTV.